Hello, and welcome to No Wrong Choices, a podcast about the adventures of life that explores the career journeys of successful and interesting people. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by the other fellows Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. If you enjoy our show, please support us by clicking follow on your podcasting platform and by giving us a 5-star rating. You can also learn more about us and connect by visiting our website at NoWrongChoices.com or by following No Wrong Choices on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This episode is part 2 of our conversation with FBI Special Agent Amanda Pike. Part 1 focused on becoming an agent, and Part 2 focuses on life as an agent. Tushar, why don't you set this one up for us?
Well, now we get into the bit of the scary stuff, right? So we talked a lot about, hey, what was the process like of, going through training and getting recruited? It took a 2-year process, etc. Well, now you've gone through all that stuff and you have the job, and now you're a rookie FBI agent. What is your first job? And now we get into the scary stuff, because now we're talking about actually having to protect Americans from real threats, not simply domestically, but abroad. And then we'll get into other stuff with it. Not simply, not just the threats abroad, but then we get into the greater threats in which she's now involved with. Because she went from essentially one service to another, and the threats don't get any easier, they only get bigger.
Agreed. As fascinating as part 1 was about how she got to where she is at the FBI agency, I'm fascinated to find out the day-to-day life, T. Like you talk about, it does get scary here, and I hope we touch on a lot of the fear and a lot of the anxiety, perhaps, that I know I would feel going to work doing what she does every day. So, it's portrayed a certain way in TV and movies, and I'm really excited to hear about what the day-to-day life is, about how she carries herself, what the culture is like, what the feeling is like when she's on her way to work every day, because that's something that none of us have any clue about, and we're going to shed some light on that aspect of it.
We talk a lot about, the people who kind of protect us when we sleep. This is that person, right? So they peek behind the curtain and they see the ugly stuff that we never will. We don't want to, we shouldn't have to. And it's not fair sometimes that someone like Special Agent Amanda Pike has to deal with that for us. And yes, it's a tough way to balance your home, your life, your family. But, she's doing it out there for us, and we really should thank her for it. And we should thank everybody who does something like this for us.
Yeah, and, with that in mind, I've often wondered, in this type of a role, can you shut it off? Are you able to let go? Are you able to relax? Are you able to be truly present with your friends and your family, and to sit around watching a movie on your downtime without, thinking about something else? So the answers to all of those questions are coming up. Here is Amanda Pike.
What's the best part about being an FBI agent?
Well, there's so many great things about being an FBI agent. And I think, I was thinking about this type of question before we got on the call today. And my favorite part of the job is definitely the people. I mean, I think since coming here, the people that I work with in and out, day in and day out, the people that I've gotten to meet in our community here in Buffalo, by far, that is the best part of the job. And I've developed so many amazing relationships over the years. And I think the nature of the work probably means that you might be closer or develop closer relationships because you feel in some way that, your life depends on these other people, your family feel like your life depends on these other people. And so I think the bonds that you build can be really, really strong. And that's been really incredible part of it. And I think having the opportunity to be out in the community and develop relationships with people that I probably, wouldn't have otherwise has also been really incredible. And of course, the job satisfaction that you referenced, sort of the political stuff aside, the reality, I think for most agents who work in offices like here in Buffalo, we're so insulated. We're really focused on being public servants to our own community, to Buffalo, New York, or Western New York, really, because we cover a territory that is far bigger than just the Buffalo area. And that's what we're really focused on. And all of that other noise really doesn't affect us too much. It's like you can just turn off the TV and there's not a whole lot of it. It doesn't trickle down, I think, not to the rank and file in the way that some people might think. We really are just focused on serving the public, and for the most part have really good and positive relationships and interactions in that regard.
And, Amanda, as a native Buffalonian, hearing you say Buffalo, it's clear that you have worked your way into the community because you certainly say it properly.
Yeah. Is there a
the
wrong
accent
way?
and the intonation have been picked up.
Well, I haven't adopted.
It's the local accent, the slightly nasal Canadian accent you now have.
Yes. I will say I have not embraced pop over soda yet, so I'm still not fully on board.
Good for
But
you.
yes, I'm holding on.
Don't do it.
I'm holding out.
Don't do it.
Buffalo, I can hear.
But no, we love it here. We love
You've
it
got
here.
it.
Yeah.
Buffalo's great. We love Buffalo.
What is
All right,
this
another
Buffalo? My
another.
God.
It's my Paris too, Shar. Leave it alone. Here's a fun one. When you get dressed in the morning, do you do it with the intent that you might have to chase bad guys, or do you just want to be comfortable?
I just want to be comfortable, and I do it with the thought that I hope I don't have to chase bad guys today, because this is definitely not the right probably outfit for that. But yeah, no, I'm mostly joking. But we keep a spare set of clothes in our cars, and most of us keep a spare suit because we're much less often in suits than we are more casual clothes. And but yeah, no, I think especially working cyber, we spend maybe more time in the office and in front of the computer than some other violations where they spend a lot more time on the street. But even then, I think dressing for comfort also is probably the best way to dress to chase bad guys, generally speaking. Yeah, a little harder to do it in a suit and nice shoes, but.
Okay, I'm going to skip the who killed JFK part. We'll
Okay,
skip
good.
That whole part.
I can't answer
UFOs,
anyway, yeah.
Okay,
I wish
fair
I
enough.
knew.
We got
I
it.
wish I knew.
Do you have a favorite dumb criminal story?
Oh, man.
Or is there that many?
They're all dumb criminals.
I was going to say, what I do, we always say is we do only catch, the ones that aren't that great at it. So, it's the ones that are really sophisticated and make our jobs that's obviously a joke, but the dumb ones are much easier to catch, generally speaking. So,
Everything seems so fast with the FBI. Is it as fast as we think it is, perception-wise, where everything moves quickly, or is it just depend on the case? Sometimes the slow go wins the day in terms of the case.
I would say in my experience, the opposite is true, that nothing moves quickly. Cold molasses uphill on a slow day seems to me like a better analogy for how things move over here. Certain cases, maybe high profile cases, certainly, life and death situations, those sorts of things. When the Bureau wants to bring all its resources to bear, it can move very, very quickly and impressively. And so I'm thinking certainly of some instances on the counterterrorism side where it's just, even from our perspective, I think it's kind of mind-blowing how quickly things move forward. And so, yes, the FBI definitely has the resources to make that happen. And when it needs to, can certainly deploy them in that way. But generally speaking, no, federal investigations don't move at the rate that a lot of local investigations move. And I think that is maybe a common misconception, and one that we battle sometimes in trying to manage expectations for victims who want to see results, who you want to see prosecutions, who want to move things forward quickly. And unfortunately, we are, it's often not a fast process. And that's speaking mostly from my perspective, which has been on the counterterrorism and the cyber side. But I think even white collar, there's a lot of long-term investigations. I think on the federal side, there's a lot of focus to, the cases sometimes are bigger, more complex. They touch multiple jurisdictions. And so all of those things interject time into the equation. That's certainly true for the kinds of cases that I work right now. The drugs and the gangs and those types of cases, I think, might move a little bit more quickly, but the nature of those violations are just totally different. So it depends a lot, I think, on the type of threat, whether it's national security or it's criminal. All of those things factor into how quickly the FBI can respond. But when it needs to, I think there is no organization that has a more robust set of resources at its disposal and can move, more quickly or in more impressive way than the Bureau.
All right. So if you can comment a little bit about it, what was your first case?
So my very first case was so of course I came out of the academy. I was assigned to a Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, which was at the time, in 2012, kind of the height of ISIS. And so the pace on the squad when I arrived was pretty intense. And it was a really exciting time. It was very overwhelming because I knew absolutely nothing about terrorism other than, 9/11 was kind of a coming of age moment for me. I was a high school senior at the time, remembered watching the event on TV in a AP physics class. And so very vivid memory. And I think, for really everybody, but in my generation also, just a real one of those moments where you knew where you were and you knew what you were doing, and it left a very serious impression on you. And so I had that kind of in the back of my mind, but of course didn't know anybody that had been killed or harmed or injured in any way in the attack, and that was pretty much it. And so I knew of certain groups, and I knew kind of generally that terrorism represented this existential threat, and that it was emanating from certain parts of the world. But outside of that, I really didn't know anything about the threat. And so I came to the JTTF here in Buffalo in December of 2012, and it really was baptism by fire. I think the benefit to being in a small to medium-sized office is you hit the ground running. And when you are a new agent that's assigned to some of our larger offices, you sometimes spend time working other things. Like you might be on a surveillance squad for 6 months, or you might be working applicants for 6 months, processing background investigations in those larger offices that are trying to backfill those roles.
Right, you get to do a little bit of everything, right?
Yes, they often pull from the new agent population. Here in Buffalo, you are immediately assigned to a investigative squad, a substantive squad, and the expectation is that you immediately start, working cases. And so I had my first 2 cases. One was a kind of a legacy Al-Qaeda in Iraq case, which I won't provide too much detail on, other than to say it was, in both cases, the individuals in the community that had been identified as having possible ties to very real terrorist organizations. And so I had that case, and then I had another case, which was essentially like a aspiring member, sort of traveler case to an individual who wanted to join ISIS. So obviously related, but not exactly the same. Yes, and really great experiences. Buffalo is kind of a unique spot to start out because, one, it's still a New York office. So even though we weren't New York City, there were many agents and support staff here in Buffalo that had been working for the Bureau at the time of 9/11 and had actually contributed to those investigations or had even responded to the site. And so there were still people here, although there are less of them now, there were still people here that had really lived through that firsthand. And Buffalo also had a pretty major case, the Lackawanna Six, if you're familiar with them.
Yes.
Another
Yeah.
kind of legacy case post 9/11 was really one of the major cases, and there were agents and really a lot of task force officers, TFOs on the squad, who had played major roles in that investigation. So that was obviously before my time, but all of that institutional knowledge still lived on the squad. And I really benefited from having those individuals as mentors. And so they were really like 9/11 legacy agents. They knew everything about these groups and who the main players were, and everybody about, that you needed to know in our community, and kind of all that historical and institutional knowledge that an agent could need and or want to be successful in working that threat here in Buffalo. And so I was very fortunate that we had those folks still on the squad at the time, and that I got partnered up in particular with one of them who was a state trooper. And I worked the counterterrorism stuff for about 6 years, and worked primarily with a state trooper who was really one of my greatest mentors when I first got here to the Bureau.
All right, so you're working cyber now.
I am.
How? And I mean, look, you've worked two unbelievable, let's say, case type loads, right? Thus far, you've started. I guess you said you started out in counterterrorism.
Yep.
And now you're in. And how long were you in counterterrorism?
About 6 years.
and then from counterterrorism, you've gone to cyber, or
That's
was there something in
correct.
between?
No,
All right,
no,
so
I
now
went from the counterterrorism right to the
one
cyber.
for the other.
Yep.
What was that transition like? And I guess the follow to that question is, do you see cyber as a bigger threat than terrorism?
So the transition was not as bad as I expected it to be. I mean,
Really?
not dissimilar to counterterrorism. I also have zero computer science and or kind of IT background. Any of the things that I initially would have thought would have better prepared me to be a cyber agent. That said, I think at the core, most of what we do here at the Bureau is just like good old fashioned police work. And it doesn't really
Right.
matter what violation you work, you employ a lot of the same skills and the same techniques against any of the threats. So whether you're working white collar, you're working counterterrorism, you're working cyber, you're working drugs and gangs, most of the things that you're doing, handling sources and issuing subpoenas and writing search warrants and reviewing records, those are consistent across all the threats. And so both the cyber and the counterterrorism work are technically fall under our national security arm. And so that's a little bit different than our criminal branch, which, the white collar and the drugs and the gangs and violent crimes against children, all that would fall under that. And so I had some familiarity with the national security side of things, but to my surprise, the cyber work was really much more criminal in nature than it was national security. And so that was in some ways actually kind of a relief. The national security work can be really frustrating and challenging in certain ways. And this on the criminal side, things do move faster and you don't have classification issues, nothing's classified secret or even higher. And that makes sharing information and working the cases, working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, charging people all a lot easier than it was on the counterterrorism side of things. And I realized that, here we employ like I said, people in all different types of roles here at the Bureau. And so on the cyber squad, we had also analytical staff, which includes intelligence analysts and tactical specialists who do a lot of strategic and tactical work that support our investigations and our work here in Buffalo. And then we have computer scientists, and they're really the experts. And I realized that if I just leveraged the people who had those particular skill sets, even though, I'm not technically trained in that way, I don't have a lot of that knowledge. I could rely on them to fill in the blanks where I maybe lacked some things, and that my investigative skills were certainly not going to waste just because I wasn't the most technically trained or, cyber savvy agent.
The part two to that question was, do you find and I guess actually kind of maybe answer this a little bit, do you find the threat greater in cyber or terrorism?
That's a really good question. And it's sort of a complicated answer. In one way, the counterterrorism threat has just changed so much. So when I came on in 2012, it really sort of the height, 2012 to 2014, really the height of ISIS and this looming existential threat, Islamic fundamentalism and Western democracy, whatever it is, that permeated just about everything. And, not just at the FBI, but general public psyche, worrying about terrorist attacks all the time and all of that. So I think at the time, the pace of the investigations, the perceived, threat as it related to counterterrorism was totally different than it is now. And I think that's also reflected. I'm sure most people have this sense that if you were, consuming media or watching the news in 2012, probably every day you heard something about ISIS, and that has changed. I think for the FBI, the whole counterterrorism landscape has changed. We certainly still work at what we would refer to as international terrorism. Counterterrorism has always had like a dual part focus, and there was the IT work, international terrorism. That's what I worked. Includes other groups other than Al Qaeda or ISIS, but those are the cases that I worked. On the other side is domestic terrorism. The Bureau also, as long as I've been here, has had that as a feature of the counterterrorism program as well. I think over the years since I transitioned to cyber, the focus has shifted much more onto the DT side, the domestic terrorism side, than it has the IT side. So the landscape has just really changed. It's different. DT brings with it also, a lot of challenges. But it's a little bit more local, which is, can be, I think, presents different types of investigations from the IT stuff, where sometimes your subjects are overseas. On the cyber side, many of our targets are not in the United States. Many of our targets are not in countries where we could ever put our hands on them, even if we wanted to. And many are in countries where it's difficult to put our hands on if we want to. And so I think that the cyber work is challenging. And in regard to a threat, it's different, right? It's not the same type of threat that groups like ISIS posed to the American public, but in regard to the dollar value of actual losses, and the potential, I think, for, a cyber attack, for instance, on critical infrastructure, or, our water supply, or power plants, or something like that, I think the Bureau has shifted their focus more toward those types of threats, and I think it's probably rightfully so. The downside, of course, is that instead of just looking at, people in your backyard or your neighborhood, unfortunately, your targets could be in pretty much any country in the whole world. And so it's really an unlimited potential for possible targets, and the internet and technology has made it possible for the bad guys to target us, to target the American people from absolutely anywhere in the world. They do not have to be in the United States. They don't have to have ever been in the United States. None of their infrastructure has to be in the United States in order for them to leverage attacks against U.S. persons. And I think one thing that I realized after coming to work cyber, counterterrorism is kind of odd in the sense that if you're doing it right, you often don't have victims yet, right? The whole idea on the counterterrorism side is to prevent. It's preventative, more preventative in nature. Not that in an ideal world we're not preventing all crimes, but that's obviously not possible. But the pressure was very intense, especially in 2012, 2014, to prevent the next attack. And so that's what we were really all working really hard to do, is make sure that those individuals that were in our area weren't plotting to do something, making plans to do something. And if everything works out as you would hope it would and as it should, then when you get to the end of the case and you make an arrest, you don't have any victims, and nobody, they haven't killed anyone, and a bomb hasn't gone off and all that. On the cyber side, we can't. The work is so different in that every case we have has a victim, multiple victims. So much of the work is victim based, and that has been something for me that's been incredibly rewarding. That you feel a level, maybe even increased contribution when you're able to put a face to the other side of that crime, and it really gives you a sense, I think, of satisfaction and motivation that maybe is harder sometimes to generate if you don't have victims on the other end. And on the other hand, it's also given me a sense of how big a problem it is, and how many victims there are out there, and how unbelievably staggering the losses are. And although sometimes these cyber crimes don't result in someone's death, they are life-changing or ending, in the sense that we see many, many people who have lost their life savings, who have mortgaged their homes, who have, or maybe later on in life, where the possibility to regain the money that they've lost as a result of some cyber crime is just, it's not realistic. And in its own way, I think that is not so dissimilar, that it is absolutely life altering, probably for some people feels life ending. And so we take the work that we do on our squad very seriously, and we take every complaint that we receive very seriously, and consider them in the same kind of way, that, these people have experienced something that's just so incredibly traumatic, and probably will change their lives. And unfortunately for us, restitution is difficult. Arrests are difficult. Our subjects, and I think we have we're pretty good at identifying who they are. And although they rarely use their true names in the execution of their crimes, we do a pretty good job of IDing who they are, but it is often very, very difficult to get them, and certainly to get any of these victims their money back. But it does not stop us from trying, that's for sure.
As I listened to you go through these different things, the question that I was going to head towards was, is there something in particular that you're proud of, a case that you solved, or a meaningful difference that you made along the way? But it sounds like, you're doing that every day. So I'm going to pivot towards, a different question, which is based upon the volume of things that you're doing. Can you ever shut it off? Is being an FBI agent the type of role or job where you're always on, you're always thinking, you're always aware?
So I think, yes, you are definitely always on. I mean, we are always, in a sense, on call. If something were to happen, we would all be expected, to the extent that we can, to respond. But certainly know of people who have canceled vacations or returned early from vacations. We work weekends, we work nights, I've worked holidays. All of that is part of the job. What I will say is that most of that is responsive, in that day in and day out, for the most part, it's kind of a regular job. We have regular-ish hours. Many of us, most of us, are also parents. I eat dinner with my kids every night. I see them when they get out of bed every morning. We're at sporting events. We coach softball teams. We have really regular lives, and for the most part, good work-life balance. I think the aspect of it that is 24/7 for most of us that have taken on this job and have an interest and passion for public service, if something were to happen that would require us to come in on a Christmas or on a weekend or after hours, it means it's something of some level of importance or trauma that there's nowhere else we want to be. And I think that's a really neat thing about the Bureau and the Buffalo office in particular, is I've had some good cases and had some great successes individually, and that's awesome. But I've also had a small piece, a tiny piece, not take credit for it kind of piece, but a small piece in a lot of other cases that I maybe never otherwise would have been able to contribute to. And even a small part of something that is just so important to this community, I think, is a really rewarding thing. And in regard to job satisfaction, yes, like sometimes the hours are long, sometimes the days are long, sometimes the weeks are long. But overall, you go home every night and you feel like you're making a difference. And I used to say this all the time at my old job, which building, children's playhouses. But I loved what I did there, and I was passionate about it, and I believed in the mission, and I was totally on board with the vision, all about it. But we used to say, like, okay, but we're not curing cancer, like if someone doesn't get their playhouse tomorrow, like the world's going to keep spinning. And that was true. And then I came here, and you do feel like everything you do has an impact. And I don't know that there are a lot of other jobs out there where I would get that same feeling of contribution and job satisfaction as I do from that. And yeah, I think really hard to produce and hard to imagine doing anything other than this.
Who knew that building playhouses was training for an FBI field agent?
I know.
Couldn't have predicted that
yes.
one. I love Larry's question about your work-life balance and can you ever turn it off? Because, that's what I think about all the time. Just hearing you talk about cyber crimes and terrorism, I would tend to get maybe cynical. I think secrecy is such a big part of your job. Like, how do you balance that with your family, the secrecy part of what you're doing day to day? Without getting too personal, tell me about how you balance that. How do you, you're having dinner with your kids every night. There's so much you can't tell them.
Yes, there is. And I'm sure there's been occasions where, I've come home and clearly had a hard day or I'm working long hours and my husband has some level of curiosity as to what I'm up to and he just can't know, or he'll hear about it on the news tomorrow. But I always think of it like any other job. And I remember being a kid sitting at the dinner table with my dad, and my dad also didn't come home and talk about, the digester at the paper mill. So I think in large part, when you go home, do you even really want to talk about work? You spend all day doing it. And you've got coworkers in this profession in particular, and on the squad I'm on, I'm very, very lucky right now. In particular, I have coworkers who, listen to me talk ad nauseum about these sorts of things. And so when I go home, it's nice to change the subject, and all I want to hear about is my kids' days and my husband's golf game or whatever it is. And I think in some ways you think, oh, the secrecy, does it create this weird dynamic between you and your loved ones at home who can't know what you do? But the Bureau also, there is definitely a focus on the work-life balance. We have events, periodically throughout the year where we bring our families into the office. My kids their pictures are up all over my desk. They, have sat in my chair there. It's not secrecy in the sense that, they don't know where I go and they don't know what name I use. We're not secret agents. Everything about what we do is kind of known. We operate in our true names and we live in our communities. And, some people are more or less comfortable talking about where they work. But for me, I've always been pretty open about it. And I like being a resource for people who might not otherwise know, where to turn. And so I think when I come home, it doesn't feel weird to any of us. They know generically what I do. They know where I work. We do also on the Cyber Squad. Another element of what we do is a lot of public outreach, way more so than I ever did on the counterterrorism side, with the idea kind of that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that we could be much better at preventing these crimes, almost all of which are totally preventable, and much more successful at that than we'll ever be at bringing real justice to a lot of these actors, many of whom are not in countries that we can get to. And so I have a public persona in that way. And so I think there's a lot that I can talk about. Not everything I do is all that interesting. Sitting at a computer for 6 hours a day, who wants to hear about that? And like I said, I think it's not so dissimilar probably from other professions where, mom and dad comes home and they don't want to talk about spreadsheets and numbers and this or that. It's just not really interesting to anyone other than the perception. Yeah. Other than the perception that what we're doing is interesting all the time. I think there's probably that. But then you start to get to know, a little bit more about it, and you realize like a lot of it is just mundane. It's still just a regular job becomes kind of normalized.
All right. So Amanda, before we let you go, I want to ask you one serious question and then a bunch of like little quick lightning round questions.
Okay.
So my first serious question is this. Obviously we are all about, wanting to give people a vision and like a roadmap to how to like a little piece of advice. So if you have one piece of advice that you want to give to someone out there who's listening and saying, hey, this is a job that you should pursue and this is the reason you should pursue it, what's that piece of advice?
So I feel like it's like three-part for me. The first is not to underestimate some of those soft skills. I think if I had when I did look at myself as a potential candidate for the FBI and I thought about what does an FBI agent look like, what kind of skills do they have, I never would have painted a picture that looked like me. And what I bring to the agency are, I think, some of the things that are so important and maybe not are underestimated by people that don't understand a lot of what we do day to day. And that is, good reading skills, good writing skills, and good speaking skills. And you can get those types of skills in many, many jobs. The most important part, I think, of what we do is talking to people. And don't underestimate the power of sales. That's also a lot of what we do, is convincing people to buy into our mission, convincing, we need the cooperation of the general public. We need people to report crimes. We need people to help us work these investigations. And so there's an element of sales and convincing people. I think that is the right thing to do. And it's also a way to contribute to something much bigger. And so I would give that piece of advice. And well, now I've forgotten my other piece of advice.
Maybe it's not that important.
Well, probably was the most important. And now all these poor people out there are going to be going, about their lives without it. But if it comes to me, I'll let you know.
All right. So my lightning round question starts with this. First, what is your favorite FBI related TV show or movie?
So I hate to disappoint you, but I feel like I hate almost all of them. And part of it is once you are on the inside, it's really hard to watch those representations. I will say I kind of enjoyed The Mindhunter, which I think was a Netflix show.
Oh, great show. Love that show.
About BAU, yes, the Behavioral Analysis Unit and the birth of that. I don't know how accurate all of it was, but I thought that that was really good. And then a lot of it, I think, is just it's difficult to watch because the representation is just so far from reality, and there's a lot of suspension of disbelief, and I think some people still enjoy that. For me, it's a little bit harder. I think there are some good, well, I will say not good, but accurate portrayals of federal law enforcement. Oh my God, it's escaping me. What is the HBO show? McNulty is the main character at Baltimore. Oh my God,
The Wire.
Oh, The
Yes,
Wire.
I think The
Yeah.
Wire.
Oh, that's one of the greatest shows
It's
ever.
such a good show.
show.
I won't say that's necessarily like the most flattering or anything like that, but I think it's it's a pretty accurate representation of, federal law enforcement and the reality of like what it's
Oh,
like
I
to be
love
an
that.
FBI agent.
Wow.
It's not, touch screens and all this technology. It's just basically, like I said, good old fashioned police work.
Has anyone ever said to you, "Hello, Clarice"?
I'm sure over the years, yes, but it promptly exited from my memory because yes, I'm sure
Oh
they
my
have,
goodness.
yes.
Is there a dress code?
If you ask some people, I think they would say yes. Officially, no. And there are certain squads in our own office, I won't speak for other offices, that are pretty much suits only. As you can imagine, that would be white collar, kind of fits the bill there. And then many other squads are much more casual. And I don't know if that's just also a sign of the times, but the days of just, men in suits are pretty much gone. Not down in DC.
Okay.
If you're at headquarters, everybody's in a suit. But here, I would say business casual is pretty much the standard.
Do you want to be called a G-man?
Or a G woman, I suppose.
guess.
Or
I have no
G person.
a G person. Whatever the PC version of that is these days. I have never been called that. And I think that is, sort of when I think of G-man, I think really of sort of the historical FBI, the old days, old school FBI, less so these days.
We'd be remiss not to ask about you being a woman in the FBI, because I do think I don't know how unique it is. I don't know what the percentage is, but
Yeah, what's the
are there
ratio now?
are there challenges presented to you because you're a woman, or is it just everyone's treated equally and we go about our business?
So I think so at the time I came through, when I was in the academy, I was in a class of about 50, and I want to say there were 10 female agents, which is actually, I think,
Wait, in
slightly
Buffalo or total?
no, that was just for my academy class.
Okay.
And of course, at the academy, you have agents that end up in offices all over the country. Here in Buffalo, gosh, how many agents do we have? I will say, I'm the only, now I work for a female agent. My boss, my supervisor is a female agent, although she's the first female supervisor I have had. I am the only female agent on the squad. I want to say about, something maybe slightly less than 20% is probably the overall percentage. So we're definitely a minority, although I think when I came through, it was probably closer to maybe to like 13% of FBI agents were women. Now maybe improvements have been
Still
made.
work to be done.
Yes, and certainly I think diversity is is certainly something that the FBI is working to increase within the rank and file, and is a value of the bureau, and so females are part of that, and other groups certainly who are not as well represented as they probably should be in the current agent population. The bureau is doing a lot of work to try to increase those numbers, and so over the years, I think yes, and certainly we have some new agents who are females, but we're still a minority. I think in regard to challenges, the bureau is kind of a really neat place because everybody brings something different, and that's not just gender specific, but also your life experiences. And I think the same is true between men and women. Am I the most physically imposing person in the office? Let's just say no, I'm definitely not. That's not what I bring, but it really has not hindered me in any way. And I have these, I have other skills that have been brought to bear over the years that I've worked here in my cases and in my relationships in the office and, with victims and with sources. And I never felt, and again, I don't want to diminish anybody else's experience because I know being a female in the FBI is certainly, you're in a minority group and it's definitely a different experience. But for me here in Buffalo, it's always been a really positive one. And because there are so few women, most of my mentors in the Bureau have been men. And I have never felt in any way that I was respected less, that my opinion was valued less, that I was trusted less in any way. In fact, just the opposite. My closest colleagues, my most important and consequential mentors are all men who I felt like have given me, every opportunity and all of that that respect that you would hope to gain from your colleagues, and gender has had absolutely nothing. I won't say nothing to do with that because I think in some ways it probably benefited me, and I brought something a little bit different to certain situations or brainstorming sessions or in just a different perspective. And I think it's always been valued, and I've never felt in any way less than because of that, or that in some way I wasn't as capable of doing this job, or not cut out for this job, or in some way don't belong here. Never a feeling that I've ever had since being with the Bureau.
You were valued as you rather
Yes.
than as anything else. So
Correct.
With that in mind, if you were talking to a young person now, whether it be a young woman or just a young person in general who is thinking about, getting into the FBI in this line of work, what roadmap would you lay out for them?
Well, I think, it's, and I hate to be trite, but the whole representation matters thing for me, I probably never would have considered this career path if I hadn't sat down with a female agent, hadn't understood, on one hand, what kind of opportunities were available for me at the Bureau, which was also, the potential to use my language skills to travel the world. We have offices all over the place, all of this intel-based work that I was really interested in. But on the other side, and maybe at 26 or certainly at 22, I wasn't thinking this way, but questions about, well, what if I want to be a mom, and what if I want to have kids while I'm an agent, and how do I balance all of those things, and is it possible? And then I think there are some, maybe seemingly kind of silly things like even, how do you dress? Because it's a lot harder for females to conceal their gun than it is for men, just based on, the cut and shape of women's clothing, and all of those things that became big questions that I had once I became an agent. I would say, to the extent that you can, if you can sit down, if you're, a young girl or a young woman who's interested in the career, and you can reach out to your local office. Most FBI agents are really, we're just regular people. We go home every night. We have dinner with our kids. We are members of your community. We'd all be very happy to sit down with you and talk to you about what it's really like day in and day out, and what the balance is like, and can you have all of those things? And I think for me, the answer has been yes, but I've been very fortunate to have, great bosses and a great office and a very supportive husband. So I've been lucky that I have a really great support system, but I've had 2 kids, right? So I was 28 when I finally came here to Buffalo, and got married while I was an agent, had 2 kids while I was an agent, bought a house, all of those things. And I think for me as a female, those would have been big question marks is, are you married to this job? Can you have a life? Can you have a normal relationship? Can you have kids? Or all of those, can you have the day-to-day, your work, with as important as it is and as demanding as it is, can you have everything else too? And for me, that answer has been yes. And I think the best way to know that, and this was the other piece of advice I was going to give earlier, which is, and this is true for, in the same vein here, is that the best way to understand the Bureau, I think, maybe some people have doubts about what it's like to work at the Bureau, or maybe what type of agency the Bureau is. The best way to know is to come and work here. And I think there's no better way to convince yourself of the value of the work we do here, and how, for the most part, good the people are here, and focused on the right things, and really trying to make a difference in our communities and for our country, by and large, I have, more faith than ever. And I'm not trying to be like an advertisement for the Bureau right now, but the best way to know is to come and to meet some of us and sort of demystify the Bureau. We're not just what you see on TV. And I think that for young people that are interested, maybe have doubts about law enforcement in general or the Bureau, just call the office, get in touch with an applicant coordinator, have coffee with an agent who's lived it and worked it and can give you some really good advice about what to do and to prepare. Again, go out, get life experience, live your life, and then throw your hat in the ring, and can also help you manage expectations about what it's really like to have this as a career.
And watch The Wire.
Maybe not. Maybe watch something else. I don't know. What's the other big one with the one I get more than Hello Clarice?
Is there a happy
is
one?
No, well, it's not a happy. There's no happy one, I don't think. But there's more or less flattering and impressive versions, I would say, of the FBI. Maybe keep those in mind. They probably do us more favors than anything. But
well, I would argue that you are also an impressive and flattering version of the FBI. Yeah, this has been
you're too sweet.
A great conversation that has provided, I think what people would want to hear, a
lot of insight,
a real insight into what it's like and what it's like and just how you can make an impact. This has been an incredibly inspiring conversation, Amanda.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much to Special Agent Pike for that great conversation. I know Amanda wasn't trying to be an advertisement for the FBI, but she certainly sold me on the kindler and gentler version of the FBI.
I got to tell you what, she wants to say that she's not a hero. She is wrong. What she does is extremely heroic. No matter how mundane she wants to try and make the life seem, what she's doing is heroic. She's making sure that your grandparents, that we keep our nest eggs for forever, and so that they aren't sucked away by cyber hackers or bad players who are out there trying to steal from us at all times. Let's be honest. She went from chasing terrorists to chasing cyber criminals. I'm not sure if you can say one is more dangerous than the other, but both are equally as dangerous in terms of the threat to America. And it's unbelievable what this woman does, and the near nonchalantness the way she talks about it, like, oh, this is just everyday work. Most of us would never want to deal with this stuff. That literally, like the darker corners of society, we would not want to deal with. She's dealing with it on a daily basis and doesn't really want to be called a hero about it. I cannot understand that mentality sometimes. The humbleness behind it is shocking. Amanda Pike, you are a hero, and what you're doing is heroic.
Yeah, I'll double up on that too. Amanda Pike is definitely a hero. Special Agent Amanda Pike, I might say. And we came into this with such an interesting perspective of, wow, this is a mysterious profession, right? We don't know much about how the FBI operates, who these people are. T, you talked early on about peeking behind the curtain. I feel like we got a real peek behind the curtain when it comes to what it's like to work for the FBI. I was so curious to see what the work-life balance is for her, because I wouldn't know how to turn it off. I wouldn't know how to turn off my anxiety when I went into work every day, knowing things that a lot of people don't know, keeping secrets from my family at the dinner table. And it turns out, not a big deal, because the last thing she wants to talk about when she's at the dinner table with her kids is work. So
work anyway,
yeah,
right?
And she's a part of the community. She's a mom. She has a family, and this is a career path that's a real possibility for people. When you hear somebody like Special Agent Amanda Pike describe what it is that she does every day, she is a hero. T, you are not wrong, 100%.
The one thing I'm very surprised about is that, she's not a hard charger, right? As even she said, she's not really like one of these, alpha, knock the door down type of people. She's a thinker, which is what you really kind of need in a job like this, right? You need someone, obviously you need folks who are going to just knock down doors, but at the same time, you need people who are going to go in and think about things, right? They've got to be able to critically think their way through a case. They've got to be able to critically think their way through clues. Just essentially, be able to kind of look a scene down and say, okay, what would I do here? What would I do here? What would I do here? I mean, that is not something that everyone can do, and it's not something that everyone can do critically. That is an important thing.
And I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of Special Agent Amanda Pike, because it sounds like she will track you down and get to the bottom of it. And I just want to say, wouldn't it be nice to go through life with comms with everything that you did, right? You have someone in your ear
for sure,
telling you.
You don't hear me in your ear all the time?
Yeah, well, you're in my ear in a different way. You
just in my head.
You were in my headspace in a much different way than comms might be. But, just to know, like, oh, don't go around that corner. There's someone lurking. There's someone robbing a bank on that block. You might want to take a left here. Comms would be so great just to go through life, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I think my big takeaway, I mean, I've a million of them, but I guess what I'll focus on is the sense of community. As she talked about getting into the job, being assigned a role or responsibility, being assigned a station and a community that you're going to be a part of, she didn't necessarily know where she was going to wind up, but she wound up in, my hometown of Buffalo, New York. And I know I made a joke earlier on that she now knows how to say the city properly and everything else, but it's nice to hear the story of somebody who wound up in a new town, worked her way in, established herself as clearly a very big part of that community, and is making a difference. It's got to feel good, and it's a really great story and a great thing to hear. So with that, Amanda, thank you for what you're doing for my hometown, and thank you again
once.
for
how do we pronounce it?
Buffalo. I don't know that I say it right anymore. I've been in New York City for so long. I think I say it completely wrong. She says it right because she is immersed in my old world. So with that, Amanda, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. Thanks go out to my lifelong friend Andy for making this conversation possible as well. We also thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, click follow on your podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if this episode or others inspired you to think of someone interesting in your life who could be a great guest on the show, please send us a note via the contact form on NoWrongChoices.com. On behalf of Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success. We learn from every experience.